So this is not my style, walking around standing behind a podium, but I'll do the best I can. So General Hoyer, men and women of the National Guard, the distinguished front row here, former chiefs, general officers, adjutants, generals, thank you so much for allowing me to come. I wouldn't have missed it, and you know, you are the reason I exist. The 450,000 men and women that you represent and you command, that as I stand here before you today, there's 53,000 men and women of the Army National Guard and the Air National Guard who are engaged in some operational duty, whether it's domestic operations or Title X warfighting duties today around the world. It's been a long time since I've seen the number that high, but as we look out and you know, I see about 12,000 airmen that are busy, and the rest of the United States Army. It is an impressive thing that we're doing, and our thoughts are with those who are about to get schwacked by Hurricane Irma, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. So I've got a few notes that I'm going to talk about, and if I finish early, we can take some questions from the crowd if that works. But what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is some of our history, a little bit from where we went, Strategic Reserve, to where we became this operational force that we are today. We're talking a little bit about what's going on in terms of our three main areas of the warfight mission, the homeland mission, some partnerships. I'll cover a bit about my priorities, which are readiness, people, and transformation, and then talk to you a little bit about what I try to spend more of my time on, which is where we're going out in front of us as we look ahead. I'm going to start this off with a short video highlights of some of the National Guard activities over the past year, and if you'll just allow me to go ahead and play the video.
There they go, they're pulling him up, he's giving him the signal to hoist him up.
There it is, the plane went right through the other tower of the World Trade Center.
I'm here because of patriotism, because I love my country. Troops with the Massachusetts National Guard were among the first on the scene after two powerful bombs exploded yesterday near the finish line of the Boston Marathon. It's extraordinary firepower.
It was a sense of accomplishment and achievement. It's something I worked hard and diligent for.
It brought me into something that became a family and not just a job.
This is a new training for me. I've never been overseas anywhere, so this is my first time outside of the U.S., learning other courtesies, customs, and learning just how people do things.
Training over here in Poland, they are building readiness.
It's something I'm going to be very proud of going home. This is a memory I'm going to share with my kids and my grandkids.
Answered every call, met every challenge, accomplished every single mission it was given.
I'm sitting here believing now in the 21st century, after 3 years in the job as Chief of the National Guard Bureau, that it is now in the best interests of the American people for the Chief of the National Guard to be made a full member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff.
The National Guard must be maintained as an operational force
The response time is quick, working with them is quick, the professionalism is unreal, and they stay till the job's done.
The National Guard is there, and we're trained, and we're ready.
Show everybody that we need to come join and that we're not just little weekend warriors, we're a lot more than that.
It's what we do in the National Guard.
And there they both go to safety. That's pretty impressive if you ask me.
Yeah, so I wish I had 30 more minutes of that so you didn't have to listen to me talk. No, it is good to be here, and I'm sorry, I want to apologize right now for anybody who happened to vote on the horse called Chief Lengyel last night. I understand I didn't do too well. I don't think Cadavi did well either, but so apologize for it if you lost any money. Okay, so as we come into this fall here, it's hard for me to believe that a year's already passed since the last time I addressed this great audience. But I think I'm going to start off with a reflection of the past, and if you'll go ahead and flip the next slide here. We're coming up on this fall, 100th anniversary, 100 years since we sent folks to fight in World War I. And as I appreciated the write-up in the National Guard magazine a month or so ago on the immensity of the National Guard effort in that event. 440,000 some National Guard soldiers were mobilized or drafted and reinstituted as part of that force that went and fought in World War I. 100,000 casualties in the span of a year, 20,000 dead, and many, many more injured. And you look at our contribution to that force, and we were a large part of the force that resulted in the winning of that war. But we learned a lot. I mean, we learned that, people came from our communities. It was really the first full mobilization as a federally regulated reserve, part of the Department of Defense. But our force structure was sent, and it was sort of disbanded, and the leadership was changed, and we went, and it was this organization that in 1933 was able to change that. And in 1933, where we were able to recognize the mobilization of units as a duty status, that gave the president the opportunity to mobilize our units and put them on duty and send them to war. And we did it, and next slide, please. And in World War II, we did it again. And we sent 300,000 men and women, men to fight this war, and many of them were the first to go. In fact, we were in a discussion in the tank yesterday, and I did not realize this, but some of the first United States Army / Army National Guard members on Guadalcanal were members of the North Dakota National Guard, the 164th Infantry. And the Commandant of the Marine Corps knew that, and as General Milley was about to venture out on a trip across the Pacific, that discussion came up, and I thought it was interesting that the National Guard had such a part on Guadalcanal. But with this mobilization for World War II, we had, again, 29 final fighter flying squadrons, 18 infantry divisions, and in many cases we're the first to ship out. And we watched the entire nation mobilize for war. And I think many of you know, as you look across the newscast today is what's on there, and the potential for conflict in Korea and or other places around the world, where actually the discussion has come to the forefront again about full and total mobilization, the need for major pieces of our force structure to be mobilized ahead to protect the national security interests of the United States and our allies. Next slide, please. So what began then as the development of this total force that we have become today, and I didn't realize this until I began to put this, I had always thought it was the 60s and the 70s and even in the 80s until our Air Force began to think about total force and the way to do it. But it really started early on in the Air Force's career. In the 1950s, where California and New York initially right on began to have aircraft on alert to protect the air sovereignty of the United States. And you know, that was really the first operational use, continuous operational use of reserve force capacity for operational mission sets that were ongoing and enduring in a time of peace. And by 1961, we had 25 squadrons in the Air National Guard who were maintaining Air Defense Command commitments to protect the security of the United States. And you know, I think that, you know, that is indicative of where we have gone today. And in fact, one of the guys that had the visionary policy to create the total force, which was the assimilation of all of the reserve components as part of our services, was Secretary Melvin Laird, who, as I was a new chief, I'll share with you, in about last October, I got a phone call kind of out of the blue from, they said, General Lengyel, former Secretary of Defense Melvin Laird would like to speak with you. And kind of caught me by surprise. And, but I said, of course, I'll speak with him, put him on. And I talked to him, and he said, General Lengyel, and if you remember last fall sometime, we were working through the issue of the California National Guard bonus issue, and we were treating our soldiers wrong about doing this. And so on the other end of the phone, I was thinking this was going to be kind of a nice call. Congratulations on being the chief. And I got an earful about how we need to be careful and not destroy the total force. And General Lengyel, you need to make sure that we fix this and we take care of our soldiers and we take care of our airmen as part of this, and we can't treat them inappropriately. And you know, sadly, it was less than 2 weeks later, Secretary Laird passed away, but his passion for what became the total force, I thought was important, that he would think enough to call me up and talk to us about the need to treat and maintain our force. And so we have become a huge part of the operational force. Next slide, please. And if you look at us today and you see some Vermont Guardsmen here from the 172nd Infantry from Vermont, and Afghan troops waiting on a Chinook in 2010. We've seen this for the past 16, 17 years of war, mobilized 850,000 men and women of our force. And we have earned the trust of our services. And we have become an integral part of the operational force in both the Air Force and the United States Army. And I think that in many ways it was physics that drove us here, and the reduction through the 90s and 2000s of our force structure, and the ever-expanding mission sets that we are engaged in now around the world, and the mission sets that we think about being engaged in, whether it's Russia or China or Iran or North Korea or violent extremist organizations around the world, and none of it's going to stop anytime soon. But the Air Force seamlessly integrates our fighter squadrons, our people, our mission sets around the world. The Army, United States Army, with the AUP program and the associations and the increased training and focus on readiness. And it is amazing to me at how well this is working. And the relationships between the services and the National Guard is as good as I have ever seen it. I mean, I saw this speech was couched as the state of the Guard. And I would tell you that the state of the force, the state of the total force, and our ability to work together to accomplish the mission sets we need is an amazing thing. And my relationship with General Milley and how he thinks and cares about you, he was yesterday in the tank with me. He was disappointed that he couldn't be here to address you himself. And, you know, it was a scheduling issue that he couldn't be here. But General Goldfein as well will address you later today. These are men who understand who you are. They understand not only your business model, but they understand the value that you bring to their force to provide capability around the world. And I think that's a good thing. It's clear that we can't do it alone. And the fact that we are now this operational force, and when I go to the Hill and they say, what is the most important thing to you? You know, and I talk about funding, and I talk about the need for predictable funding for all of the services so that we can plan and we can program and we can train and we can be a ready force. As I say, whatever force we build, I would tell you that we should never again build a force that does not include a continued and regular operational use of the reserve component. Because when they use us and when we are integrated to the force, everything works better. They trust us. There is one standard amongst the services for how we do our mission-related tasks. There is no change. There's development of our leaders. The Army and the Air Force are willing to invest in us, to buy us equipment, to pay for our training, because they use us as part of the operational force. And so there's that two balancing act piece. We're always working for that, what we're doing now, this rotational piece, where as we look across today, of those 53,000 men and women, about 20,000 of them are in every combatant command and 44 countries out there around the world. And so we are a valued piece of the force. And I think that's great. And we should never, ever again be put on the shelf as a strategic reserve. Next slide. So we talk about the warfight piece of this thing and the warfight piece up there, and I can't help but point out the 158th Fighter Wing from Vermont, who back last December with 36 days notice in an all-volunteer status, because there was a carrier gap in CENTCOM, they needed some combat capability to deploy, and they were able to come to the Guard, and they were able to respond in 36 days. I actually had to tweak that number up. Every time I tell this story, it loses a day. So it's gone from 36 to 34 to 30 to 1. But so I had to go back and readjust my facts to make sure that that within 36 days from being asked to go, they were dropping weapons on top of ISIS in Mosul and Iraq. And I think in Raqqa. And I think that you know, that's an amazing characteristic. The 29th Infantry Division, I see General Garrett here, who has had from Virginia. I was there at their deployment ceremony, and when they came back just recently, swapped out with the 35th Infantry Division as part of Operation Spartan Shield. I think it's, we have division headquarters engaged in Iraq and Afghanistan. I think that says a lot about the trust that the Army places in us, the need for us to make sure that we are training properly, selecting the leaders properly, to control mission command inside battle space. And I've got cyber up there because cyber is this expanding mission set that has been going on. And whether we talk about cyber from, you know, as I went to Fort Polk for JRTC and saw the 76th Infantry Brigade Combat Team doing their training, and I went into the brigade Tactical Operations Center, and I saw their cyber defensive team. And I talked to the individuals there who people are attacking the cyber TOC, and the head individual that was running the defensive cyber effort happened to be a Toyota cyber security specialist. And he had done such in his civilian capacity, but in his military capacity, he was protecting that command and control node from being attacked. And Cyber Shield 2017, over 800 reserve component men and women from some 42 states that competed and exercised to do that. We're engaged across the spectrum of all mission sets in the warfight. Next slide, please. In the homeland, you know, I really, this has unfolded over the past month as an example of how we have refined the response capacity, how we have integrated our capabilities with the federal forces. I just want to tell you that I watched it, and Harvey was bad. We thought it was going to be bad. We knew it was going to be bad, but the synchronicity between the state of Texas, who owned this response, the National Guard and all of the contributing states, the active components and you know, Army North and all of the components who supported that fight, it worked as good as I have ever seen it work. And Lieutenant General Jeff Buchanan, the Land Component Commander, set up a command node inside of Texas with which all Title X forces flowed into, and then he gave them to the dual status commander for operational use. The 36th Infantry Division set up their headquarters, and they took in all of the inbound forces from the Title 32 force, and he funneled those to the dual status commander for operational use. And it worked extremely, extremely well. And my hat's off to Guard Nation. My hat's off to Guard Nation, who mustered some 30,000 men and women from outside of Texas to do that and to help be ready. And I think that's an amazing thing. One of the slides up there in the upper left-hand corner is of the slide is the New York Air National Guard 106 Rescue Wing. They had 546 saves with their helicopters down there in Houston. A couple of months ago over the Atlantic Ocean at night, 1,200 miles offshore, they parachuted at night some pararescue forces onto a burning ship and rescued those forces and saved their lives and got them back. So, the capabilities that we have in the National Guard across the force, but in our National Guard are really amazing. The kind of untold story of the wildfires, we've got 1,500 men and women fighting fires in their states out there, California, Montana, Oregon, and Washington. It is just what we do, and they have been doing it for months. Kind of under the radar as these massive hurricanes have come out, but they're using capabilities like I saw last night. They were getting a SecDef approval to fly an ISR asset over the fight to help them identify how better to fight those fires. So we have adapted. We have begun to use technology in other ways traditionally not thought of for domestic ops. And I think that's important. And of course, we all watch Hurricane Irma today with anticipation, and the response has been equally impressive as states from across the nation have volunteered their forces to come and support Florida and the Southeast Gulf states. So we'll watch them, and I know we'll do great. I have to point out Monday, the 16th anniversary of 9/11, and it's hard to imagine that the world changed for all of us, and starting next week, people who were born after 9/11 are going to be driving cars. And it seems like yesterday to all of us, but time flies, and I think it's an important consideration to realize what has changed since 9/11. Next slide. I talk about the partnerships piece of this, and I take this in terms of partnerships to absurd levels of connectivity, but partnerships with our services obviously is most important. Partnerships with our communities for youth challenge programs and star-based programs and all of the things we do. Partnerships in the interagency are strong and robust and uniquely National Guard. And you can see all of those things. But highlighted in this slide are our partnerships from the State Partnership Program. This last month with the state of Washington and Malaysia, we signed our 80th State Partnership Program. And what we're doing now is we're building combat capability with these state partnerships, where we're growing capacity to provide security rather than consume it. And I believe it's a key component of the combatant commanders' campaign plans to work with this. And I point out in that slide, you've got the A-10s from the Maryland National Guard, you've got the Estonian JTACs, who are practicing a highly technical skill and that they have learned from working with us and our partnerships. But I'll just take you back to what this has become as I testified to the House Appropriations Committee last year, and Congressman Ruppersberger said, General Lengyel, what do you think the Russians think when they look across the border and they see the Maryland National Guard postured there, training and doing operations with their partner country? And I said, well, sir, I don't think they see the Maryland National Guard. I think they see the United States Army. And that's what they're doing when they're across the way. They are part of the world's greatest army, and when we're over there, the partnerships and the benefits we get from these partnerships are just another part of who it is and what we do. So we're building warfighting readiness. Which leads me to my priority discussion. Next slide, please. So readiness. Sergeant Major Kepner, for those of you who don't know him, my senior enlisted advisor for the Army, for the National Guard Bureau. Everything is about readiness. He asked me if that's, sir, is that a readiness burger you're having for lunch? He drives readiness to concrete. He gets up in the morning and talks about readiness coffee and 2 scoops of readiness every Friday, and it has become contagious. It has become contagious for all of us to talk about. But we get that from the Secretary of Defense's priorities, which is his number one priority is to build readiness. This is my number one priority. It's General Milley's number one priority. It's General Goldfein's number one priority, is to make the force ready to do what America needs to do. And in our case, that's whether it's provide forces to the president or provide forces to the governor. And I think that the Secretary of Defense, General Mattis, has described readiness as as lethality, as the ability for our force to impose unacceptable costs on the enemy. And I think that we think about that, and no matter what your skill set may be, you should think about, and our forces think about as we travel about, they should think about that is what we're doing. And even in this response to Hurricane Harvey and Hurricane Irma, we're thinking about the preparation, the road march, the deployment in terms of how can we build our readiness in the execution of this mission. And I think that it's important. So what is it about readiness that we need to do? We need to grow it. We need to make sure that we are more ready than we have ever been. And the readiness challenges that we face is we need to be able to make our forces ready faster, so that should the United States Army need us to go to Korea, we can mobilize and move the force faster than we used to be able to move it. And what does that mean for us? Does that mean more training days? It might. It might mean more training days for the United States Army and in some MOSs and how we're doing. And General Cademy, if he was here, he would tell you, hey, we're already doing it. We already are doing much more than 39 days a year, as many of you know. But what we do need is we need predictable cycles. We can't do this all the time. We have this civilian piece of our life, which we hold very dear, and we need to make sure that we maintain that these predictable cycles, a period on to train and deploy, a period off to do our civilian lives and maintain our employer relationships. Sustained utilization, I believe, is an important piece, continuous rotational piece of what we do. It develops our leaders. It builds trust with the components. They understand who we are when we deploy, and I believe it's a very important part of maintaining the operational force. Increased full-time support for the Army National Guard. I believe that, on the air side, we're about a 35% full-time force. The Air Force has leveraged our full-time force to build and grow and produce sorties, to build and grow and produce mission, and it has become a very capable and efficient business model. And I believe, and have communicated to General Milley and to the Secretary of the Army, that I believe that in order for us to increase the readiness of the Army National Guard, the reason we exist and the reason we have full-time forces is to make sure that when they come to drill, when they come, they can train. And they have to have equipment that works. We have to have ranges scheduled, weapons, all of the things that enable the force to be ready and trained, and that's what we need to do. So more full-time support is something that I believe we need to grow over time the ability of our full-time support. Increase pre-mob training and the quality of training, and I believe that's huge. Eliminate unrelated, General Mattis, I would be surprised if Secretary Wilson didn't convey to you yesterday the elimination of time that is not value added toward training, and that's something that we're going to have to keep doing. So building readiness for the force is it. Okay, next slide, please. I show you a picture here of the fine-looking gentleman, and not the one with the glasses. I met this individual, Specialist Arifin Chowdhury, and being that people is our most important resource, this is just an example of the kind of people that we have in our force. And he immigrated from Bangladesh. Okay, he came here in 2009. He got a Bachelor of Science degree in biology. In 2010, he got a Master's in biology. This is an E4 specialist. In 2012, he got a graduate level certification in disaster management. In 2013, he went to Oxford University and studied global leadership. In 2014, he had a fellowship and studied on Wall Street, and he has now a second master's in financial management. He speaks 5 languages. 5 languages. And as I met this kid, and he's about to graduate from law school, and the Georgia National Guard is sending him to OTS. So I would just tell you that, how do we find these people and where do we get them? I feel so unaccomplished when I stand next to people like this, but that is what we have in the National Guard. It's just one example. And it is our most important weapon system. It is our most important resource. And it is our job that we can't do warfight, homelands, and partnerships without taking these people and leveraging them to do. We have to find them, keep them, and develop them. Next slide. So how do we do this? Picture here of the 29th Infantry Division coming home in July. We have to make sure we don't waste their time. We have to make sure that we carefully balance so when they come to work, they get to train, and when they train, we actually use them and deploy them, and they become a part of the operational force. That's what motivates them. We have to reduce ancillary training. We have to do all the things that make them not want to be part of it. We have to take care of their benefits, and I know that this association and others have worked hard to fix 12304 Bravo, and I'm liking what I'm seeing about being able to get people similar benefits for similar duties, and the duty status reform initiatives that are ongoing inside the Pentagon have been good, but we need to stay on it. Benefits parity is important, and employers, and General McKinley, I know, had to go back to Florida to rescue his wife from Hurricane Irma, but I've partnered with him, and I ask all of you that realize that I know our employers, and we just recognized them with the Patriot Award back in the Pentagon with all of the fantastic employers who are doing things for all of you to allow and enable you to serve our nation in both a civilian capacity and in the military. And even my employer, who has had me on military leave now for 14 consecutive years. I hope they haven't forgot about me. I'll need them here one of these days. But I do want to thank all of you and make sure that we do whatever we can to get them recognized. Help me, if I can, recognize those who employ you and make it worth their while to keep people in the National Guard. Next slide. So those were my 3 priorities, and I talked a little bit about the readiness and the people piece of this and the partnership, Warfight Homeland Partnership. But what about innovation and why? I think we are changing. I was struck as I thought about the First World War and the Second World War and the leaps in those technologies. And then I thought about the leaps in the technologies from maybe the Second World War to the Gulf War and the first Gulf War to the Second Gulf War. And the fact that technology is changing at such a rapid rate. And the fact that as the National Guard goes forward, we have to be ready and willing and accepting of change such that we become part of it. It's a way to transform. And how do we continually make sure that as an organization, we are looking to the future? So what am I doing? Three things that I'm doing. The first thing I've done is I drew people in from the field and had an organizational assessment to look at us and say, what can we do better? Because the only reason we have a National Guard Bureau is to support you. It's to support the 54 and the 450,000 men and women in the National Guard, to enable resources to flow to you so you can train, so you can fight wars and do homeland and build partnerships. And so they came in and they looked at us, and we haven't fundamentally changed much about us since General Blum was the chief of the National Guard Bureau. The 25th chief was the last time where we invented the Joint Staff and we changed the structure of how the staff functioned and how it worked. But a lot has changed about us and what we do and how we're organized and the operational use of not just the Air Force but the Army, and putting myself, the chief of the National Guard Bureau, as a member of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and what can we do such that if we can we squeeze out resources to go back to the field. And I would tell you that in that review they found 90 some suggestions that we can do it. We are taking 100 AGR resources out of the headquarters and sending them back to the field to help improve readiness. It's not enough. I'd like to do more. We're taking another 100 resources that this research found and reallocating them in our staff to do other new and important things that we weren't able to do before, and we're doing that. So first thing was take a hard look at ourselves, and we did that. And frankly, that's something everybody does. New chief comes in, re-look at yourself, make some staff changes, try and do things better, and my hope is that'll work. Next chief will come in and undo everything I did, probably. So the second thing is, look at the next slide. I established the National Guard Innovation Team. So the National Guard Innovation Team is, I wanted to try and leverage some people like Specialist Chaudhry. So I wanted to go out and get some of these people who can come and work, and this is about a month ago, that team meeting with me in Quarters 9 on Fort McNair. And these are special people made up from the states, and it's every rank from enlisted to general officer, and these folks own businesses. They own engineering firms. They're aerospace test engineers, solar farm developers. And we have a professor of music at George Washington University. We have energy experts, cybersecurity company owners. They came so that how can we look and see and try and find different ways and solution sets to solve our problems. And the first problem I threw at them was, I said, I was convinced that we didn't have great communication network to get to all of the members of the National Guard, whether it be federal information pushed to the states, pushed to the people, or whether it be state information pushed, or questions and RFIs that might come up. And I was focused on modalities, and they came in and basically decided and explained to me that it's not about the modality, it's about the method, the strategy, the network of communications. It's not public affairs, and gave me some really good ideas that I intend to implement here in the near term. So the National Guard Innovation Team, I think, is something that I hope to leverage, and I hope you can leverage it. Hope you can give it ideas and problems to solve, and we can do it, and it's a resource for all the adjutants generals, and some are using it as well right now. Partnerships. In terms of how we do it, we established a partnership with MD5. MD5 is an organization that created by the Department of Defense. It's based on the National Defense University, and its job is to connect enterprise solutions and technology and entrepreneurs with military people who have problems that need to be solved. It creates an ecosystem of problem solvers to think of new and innovative ways to solve problems. So we partnered with that. We've had 3 hackathons so far in New York, Texas, and Massachusetts, and we've got more scheduled. I think Colorado is the next hackathon that we've got scheduled. But they look at problems. Well, the Texas one that I just went to had hey, there's a natural disaster. How can we use technology, again, to assess damage quicker and get response to where it's needed faster? And they did a great job and came up with some really innovative solutions. So partnerships is huge. Next slide, please. And I've created the Chief's Challenge, which many of you have. It opened about a week ago. There's a little film with Command Sergeant Major Kepner and myself on the front of it. The website on the slide is where you can go to get in it. So we partnered with MD5 and the Veterans Administration to do a crowdsourcing event and find out how we can find out better how to get you the Veterans Administration benefits that you need. Kind of a collaborative effort with the Veterans Administration and you. So those are 3 things that I'm trying to do to improve the way NGB can be more responsive to you, to make us a more relevant and transformative force. Next slide. So here's what people looking at it and go, why has he got a phone booth out there? And his phone booth is because, I don't know, there's probably everybody here old enough to know what that is, but I just sent my daughter off to college and she has never used that thing. And in 2007, AT&T took them all down. 2007 wasn't a very long time ago, and I don't want to be a phone booth. Does that thing still work? Yeah, it still works. Can you talk to people? Yeah, you can still talk to people. But can anybody use it? Does it do anything that is relevant to the way the world fights today and the way we're going to fight tomorrow? And the answer would be no. And so, I think about this and I try to think about 2030. Why 2030? Because it's close enough that I can sort of see it and far enough away that I can realize how fast things are going to change. And that's only 13 years from now. And I look at 2030, I hope to be sitting right down there, right between General Temple and General Conaway. And I'm going to be sitting down there, and I'm going to be looking up here at the 31st Chief of the National Guard Bureau. And that's 3 away from me. General Blum is 3 behind me. It seems like yesterday. And it seems to me that warfare is changing. It's blurring. And as we look out there in the future and we see, the fight abroad is now the fight at home. And technology of information warfare and cyber in space and all of the things, there's no longer an away game and a home game. It's all one big game. And people don't want to fight us if they can avoid it. They want to fight us where they don't have to meet up with the world's greatest army and the world's greatest air force. And so we have to look at ways to change. We have to be open to change. We have to wonder what it is that's going to change. And I think that in 13 years from now, when the 31st Chief is up here, whoever she is, she's going to be up here and she's going to have a whole other set of problems. And those problems are emerging over the past. So if you look at the next slide, this just tells you that, look, we have an obligation to think ahead. We have an obligation as an institution to adapt and to change. And as the United States of America looks now and develops a new national military strategy, I don't know what's going to come out of it. I do not know what's going to come out of it yet. But we're going to fight. We're going to build a military that works for not just today, but for tomorrow. And does that mean we're going to have to change? It's going to mean we're going to have to change. And it's going to mean that we're going to have weapon systems and structures that can't survive and can't produce and aren't relevant. They're that phone booth. It's going to come out in the past, and we're going to have to accept it. And I think that, I think that the history has shown and evolution has shown that those that adapt and change survive. And I think it's important that we kind of lead the way to where that's going. Next slide. I'm going to end this now with that. This has kind of become our brand. It's a thing that we do. It's what I take everywhere when I go up there, Warfight Homeland Partnerships, and that soldier or airman in the middle. That is our most important weapon system. I want to thank you for what you do. And on behalf of the chairman, on behalf of the president, on behalf of everything for the 450,000 men and women that you represent, I know what you do. I know what it's like to live two lives. I know what it's like to balance driving the drill and not knowing if there's going to be a resolution that gives us a budget and if you're going to get paid for it. Or I know what it's like to have to try and find ways to get from your employer and be ready to go. And it's an amazing thing that we have men and women like you and those that you lead who are willing to be the citizen soldiers and citizen airmen for our great United States Army and United States Air Force. And, with that, I want to say thanks. I'm looking forward. This first year went so fast. But 2030 is going to be here before you know it. And I think as an institution, we've got to be willing to change and lean forward and adapt with it. And I know we can. Thank you all very much. You want me to take a question or two? Okay. Okay, everybody have a seat. Thanks. I'll take a couple questions if anybody has anything they want to ask me. I should have planted one. We got one coming.
Good morning, sir. Colonel Scott Howard from Alaska.
Hey, Scott.
With the evolving threats and challenges in the Arctic domain, the Alaska National Guard and the National Guard Arctic Interest Council have engaged in several fronts to include the Institute for Defense Analysis Arctic Study, Arctic Eagle Exercise Planning, Execution, U.S. Northcom's Arctic Capability Working Group. Can you give us your thought on NGB's way forward in the Arctic, as well as any potential resources for strategic Arctic programs?
Sure. Well, I'll tell you this. I'll say that, I'm aware of the Arctic Council. In fact, had I not had NGAUS and been able to go, I probably would have not gone anyway because of the hurricanes. But right now, as we speak, the Air Force is on a expedition with all of the partners, not just, it's the combatant commanders that have equities. The National Guard is part of this. I think the Canadians are part of it, and they're going on a tour of Alaska, Canada, across all the way to Greenland to study issues related to the Arctic. It's obviously become a huge security issue for the United States, and there's lots of competition growing and emerging inside the Arctic. The National Guard will be there. Part of it will be through the Council. Some of the innovative things, frankly, that the Alaska National Guard has come up with, your emergency response packages that you've built and been able to deploy should the increased traffic on when, it's not if, it's when some tragedy happens up there that requires people to go get rescued in large numbers that you bring to the forefront. But, clearly there's going to be increased strategic competition in there. We'll be part of the Army, the Air Force. The Navy would tell you that, we don't buy any of this stuff. We're plenty of engaged up there in the Arctic right now. We have been for years. We're there. We have been there. It's just the increased, interest with the Russians, the Chinese, everybody else on the surge for resources. So it is a topic that comes up. The National Guard will be part of it. We have some unique skill sets with our ski birds, obviously experts in cold weather operations up there in Alaska, and all of the states who are part of the Arctic Council. So thanks for your leadership and setting that up and being part of it. And I'll engage on your behalf, from here on out. Great question. Thank you.
Thanks, sir.